The idea of becoming the performance consultant, where you find expensive problems and you're then weaving those into your learning people skill strategy and finding ways to solve it, that's still very much the name of the game here. Because if you're not having the right problems to solve, skills is not going to be that silver bullet. Just the same way AI is not going to be the silver bullet. And that's what's on my mind. I'm Harold, and this is my Curious Corner. Hi there. Welcome to the wrap-up episode of Harold's Curious Corner, Season 2. In this season, we went really deep into the skills rabbit hole, and we asked ourselves the big question: how do you build a skills-based organization? This is one of those questions that in my client-facing role, I get almost every week from learning leaders. So I wanted to dive as deep as I could to understand the foundations and how to do it right. It's also a very timely topic as the skills-based organization is becoming a widely discussed topic for any learning and development or HR team that's around. The need to upskill and reskill your workforce is very, very important, especially in the age of AI.
For skills, it's been part of our value proposition. If we hadn't had AI, we wouldn't have been capable of providing this dynamic vision of a skills framework and ontology and skills. So when you have that integrated, you have this dynamic vision, you need to have these different layers of structure, even different definitions of what is a skill, what is not, what is a competency, what is not. Should we think about tasks and not skills anymore? What about the jobs? Are they done for good or are they still important in some use cases? The answer is you need all of that.
So I asked a lot of questions in this season. For example, questions like, should people build a skills-based organization? Is it a waste of time? Where is it relevant? A lot of these questions that I think we need to ask ourselves, even the uncomfortable ones, because we don't want to be working on projects that don't deliver value. Then we lose our influence in the organization. So to really go through this and to approach the skills topic very methodically, I studied this book from Koreen Pagano, which was the first Curiosity guest, which is called Building the Skills-Based Organization, a Blueprint for Transformation. Highly recommend you to buy it and check it out yourself if you are a people professional, learning and development professional, or someone interested to learn more about the world of skills.
What's happening with skills with AI is that HR folks and L&D folks are being asked to reimagine how people are working. And skills require the people working with the skills data to understand the work being done.
So with Koreen, we basically made an audio version of the book covering key themes and understanding the components of the skills-based organization. What is it? How does it function? How would someone start by building skills? What are some of the things they should or shouldn't do? When's the right point to look at skills technology? How do people go right in this way? How do people go wrong? So the curiosity angle was to be blue sky thinking and high up talking about these topics and using the book as the framework. So this was a really interesting way for me to open this season and the story arc and answering the question, everyone talks about the skills-based organization, but how do you actually build it? Or should you actually build it? So as with a lot of things, we're coming back to if you have organizational alignment, you have clarity on the problems you're solving, the idea of falling in love with a problem, then the skills-based organization can be a real vehicle to drive you towards the future of work and basically making your workforce ready with the upskilling and reskilling initiatives. If you're not doing it correctly, it could be a giant waste of time if your organization is not aligned. So we talked about the idea of these toll gates for a skills-based organization. The first toll gate is, does anyone outside of HR actually care about a skills-based organization? If the answer is no, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time on it. The second point is the organization invested in this and solving the right problem? Like, is this the answer to the organizational challenges that we're finding from a hiring, a talent development point of view, looking wider at the workforce planning? is skills the solution? It can't be that we only see skills in a skills-based organization as the only solution when it might be part of a bigger organizational puzzle. So with Koreen, we really dove into, how does this thing work and what should people keep in mind when they're looking at it? So it gave us that foundational understanding, and that's where the book is really good as well. And I highly recommend you to check it out. We then went into multiple episodes that are the perspectives episodes. These are where I'm taking the curiosity and how do we build a skills-based organization, and I cover this perspective from different angles. One of my favorite episodes I've filmed so far was with Sandra Loughlin.
You should figure out the roles you want to target from a skills data perspective, and then figure out what are the most critical skills for that role. It needs to be business driven. And business driven is like focusing on what do I need to understand about that role to help the business improve the fit for that role, the development of that role, the hiring for that role. Start with the business problem, figuring out what those skills are that they need.
Been a big fan of Sandra's work at EPAM Systems for years, and she's really perfected the way the skills-based organization works. And it's really interesting to dive deep into her story, how she worked with EPAM, how close she was aligned to the leadership team in terms of the problems they're solving, but equally some of the ways that their skills ecosystem works. For example, she's saying that the skills taxonomy should be owned from an IT perspective, or the skills data should live in specific systems outside of the learning or HR system. And to really drive that skills-wide transformation, you need to have IT on board. So Sandra wrote a really interesting case study on EPAM's journey, where she basically documents a lot of these steps, which became a big inspiration for my interview with her. So I highly recommend you to check that out for someone who have really perfected the way an SBO can work, but also she has a lot of tips and tricks for someone who's starting out with the skills-based organization journey. So it doesn't have to be that, you need everything figured out. You just need to start and you need to find that alignment. The idea of becoming the performance consultant, where you find expensive problems and you're then weaving those into your learning people skill strategy and finding ways to solve it, that's still very much the name of the game here. Because if you're not having the right problems to solve, skills is not going to be that silver bullet. Just the same way AI is not going to be the same or silver bullet. So this is where, looking at season 1 and AI and looking at season 2 and skills, they're very much the same thing here, where a lot of people see it as a solution to everything, which is not. When done correctly and solving the right business problems, can be very effective, but it could also be a giant waste of time and an area where a lot of people are spending resources on when you don't know what you're actually solving. So take a step back, look at the problems we're solving, and see if skills could be a way to reach those. And if so, and you have the org-wide alignment, then you can go on the skills-based organization journey. And Sandra's story is really interesting, where EPAM are essentially aligned from the top down, from CEO and the C-suite, that skills-based organization is something we need to do to retain, develop, and hire the right candidates. So it's a really interesting story. I highly recommend you to check out the episode. We're then moving into a couple of different perspectives episodes where I wanted to get different takes on this. I wanted to look at another practitioner who actually built a skills-based organization and then have left this world to kind of see the reflections from that. So I spoke to Eran.
So in the end, when we're talking about learning solutions, we spoke about skills, right? So not just the theoretical, provide the practical as well, but in one place, not split the experience. So I think that those learning solutions need to be way more holistic and more contextual, right? Related to what are your day-to-day, your challenges.
Eran scaled the skills-based organization at booking.com. He shared lots of tips and tricks on how did he start? How did he build his taxonomy? How did he look at the tech ecosystem? And now Eran actually left and he has his own startup tackling the kind of learning technology problem from a different angle, which is learning in the flow of work and allowing leaders to get content to their teams really easily. So recommend you to check out Eran's startup. And Eran shared lots of interesting tips on How did he grapple with this idea? How did he look at the problem to skills-based organization, the technology side? And the world is really changing. We're moving from the idea of these static libraries to dynamic, contextual learning in the flow of work, whether that's embedded into ChatGPT or Copilot interfaces, whether it's the idea of a proactive coach in your pocket. This comes back to the episodes I did previously with Lori and Ashwin and others, where we talk about where AI is going and the trends that's going on in the AI world and how those are interfacing with the learning technology world. So whichever way you're consuming content, it needs to be contextual. And you need the buy-in from your workforce to make the skills-based organization work. Eran shared a pretty interesting stat, which is, the utilization of these libraries are not always where they should be because the curation is not done properly or the content isn't relevant for the users. The what's in it for me idea hasn't always been done properly. So this is where, if you're taking this kind of step by step, you need the org-wide alignment on why you build a skills-based organization. You need to do the right consulting with the business, and you need to build that taxonomy using all of the interviews and all of the work around the business and have it be more custom than just off the shelf. So it needs to be relevant. You pick the right technology, and then there's all of the change management that goes into ensuring these programs are succeeding. And that marketing it for the employees is a key element, because otherwise this becomes an initiative that HR does in their ivory tower, and it's actually not relevant for the wider business. In other words, if your managers are not aligned that their employees should work on skills-based organization, they're not going to spend time on it. So this buy-in and change management is arguably one of the key components for HR, learning development people teams who are rolling out the skill strategies. Is the business aligned with what you're doing? If not, maybe that's a bit of a red flag. So Eran shared lessons learned and also his successes from doing this at Booking.com. We then went into a very interesting episode with Matthew Daniel.
There's a whole lot of e-learning out in the world that actually doesn't build skills. If we're honest with ourselves, skills aren't things that are built in minutes, not even in hours, usually not in days. Skills are built over weeks and months and years.
He is a practitioner who spent years building a skills-based organization in some of the largest financial services companies. He then moved to the vendor side, and he actually works for Guild, who do these really interesting upskilling programs for different audiences. And he's one of the leading voices on how do we actually build a skills-based organization. He consults multiple Fortune 500 CHROs and chief learning officers. How do we do this thing? He talked about a really interesting kind of metaphor that I wanted to bring for you, which is kind of how do we distinguish between different skills, what is perishable and what is more deep-rooted. And he talked about the idea of a tree where the skills that are going to be there for the future are those that have deep roots. They're very deeply tied to the future. They have deep roots. Whereas then you have the leaves where these are the skills that maybe aren't going to be there in a couple of years. So double down on the skills that are not changing. Some of these are soft skills, and others could be critical thinking skills that are not that domain specific. So there's a difference here between skills that are deep rooted within the business. These can often be proprietary, coming back to the idea that you need to consult with the business. So focus on those skills that will stand the test of time, skills that have been relevant previously and are still relevant, and those that have deep roots. Focus less on the skills that are the leaves, that are trendy but may not stand the test of time. So from my perspective, focus on skills that are easily transferable, things that you could use in the future of work. Double down on things like soft skills, writing skills, and of course, learn AI skills as well. But focus on things that isn't going to be going away anytime soon. So this is where that alignment on what skills are we working on. It's a real area where HR needs to work with the business leaders to essentially ensure we're solving the right skills. Another skill that Matthew talked about, which I think is really interesting, is the idea of discernment, the ability to judge well. We're seeing a lot of AI videos and things of that nature popping up, and they're getting really good. some of us would say they're getting scary good. So how do you judge that output? How do you judge if it's actually the real video versus a fake video? The idea of discernment or judging well, looking at something critically and being able to distinguish fact from fiction, that's a critical skill. And that will even be more important going forward. So that's an example of something that has deep roots and will be equally relevant going forward. I chatted to Samantha Murray.
At the end of the day, everything is customer. The user that you're serving, the learner that you're serving in this context is a customer of yours, whether they're internal or external, doesn't really matter. When you remove some of those labels and you really just think about it from the product mindset, from that product lens, they're a customer. It's your duty to provide value to your customer through whichever means possible. Usually that means removing friction such that they can do their job better, thereby achieving more value, thereby improving their productivity and their performance, and then driving business results.
Sam is a previous colleague of mine and a leading consultant and voice on the idea of experience design and how you're building out the right experiences for your employees or customers. We talked about customer journey mapping or employee journey mapping and the idea of mapping out the touch points in which employees or customers are interacting with the tools that you have. We also talked about the idea of being customer or employee first when you are designing. And it's really important to think of your employees. What I again said, a lot of skills-based initiatives goes to die if employees are not bought in. Employees are often bought in because managers aren't bought in. So the idea of consulting with the business and building these experiences that actually think of the learners, thinking of user experience, thinking of easy ways to reach users. This is something I talked to Sam about, and I highly recommend that you check out because the world's best programs are not going to be actually utilized if the user experience is bad, if the navigation is bad, if the integrations aren't working, if it's cumbersome. The idea is if you haven't solved the what's in it for me as an end user, it likely isn't going to get the traction that you want. So the marketing and the building the employee experiences that you actually want is very, very relevant. I've seen also a lot of teams are buying tech without understanding how to use it and haven't really thought of the end users in this situation. Coming back to the idea of change management, this is a critical component to ensure that this is successful. So I had lots of interesting experiences with Sam here and really focusing on building programs that are actually lasting the test of time, that are actually relevant for the end users. So from this perspective, Sam gave a very interesting take on how a skills-based organization actually will relate to programs that people want to engage with. So throughout this story arc, we have been diving deep into the skills-based organization using Koreen's book as a framework. We've seen the stories from Sandra and EPAM and Eran and Booking, as well as Matthew's very interesting take on, what skills should we focus on towards the future? And then Sam finished us off with the idea of how experience design, customer journey mapping, and thinking of the channels in which you're giving content to your users. Potentially you're embedding it inside of teams or where they live every day to make it frictionless for people to work on skills, to actually be able to take these programs and drive adoption. That's a critical component as well. So throughout this season, I wanted to take the idea of how do we build a skills-based organization, understand the foundations, then hear stories of how people are doing it successfully and lessons learned so you could look at this yourself. And then giving tips and tricks on the skills to learn towards the future, Matthew giving us some really interesting perspectives. And then lastly, how do we build programs that people actually want to consume? All of this have been part of season 2 of Harold's Curious Corner. Very interested to get your feedback. What did you like? What do you want to see more of? What type of guests should we have? And what topics should we cover? It's very interesting in the last episode with Sam because it's actually teased very well up towards the future story arcs that we're working on. We're going to transition a little bit from looking only at the employee side to transition and look at learning outside the 4 walls of the organization for customers, partners, ecosystems. We're going to be diving into the world of customer education, training the non-employee side. And I'm going to be speaking to different leaders who have a real finger on the pulse of this. Some of the biggest influencers in the customer education space. And it's interesting because Sam is one of them, And the idea of experience design, whether you're building for customers or partners, it's still an end user. It's still someone who needs to consume your content and someone who needs to do it beyond what they have to do, but actually want to look at your program and actually succeed. So I'm going to be chatting to multiple people that I know, including Dave Darrington, who's the founder of C-Lab podcast that I've been listening to for years, also real influencer within the space. I'm going to talk to Courtney Sembler, who founded or were one of the early leaders at HubSpot Academy, and hear how she made HubSpot Academy a household name and all the lessons learned from basically building one of the most recognizable customer education programs in the world. I'm also going to be speaking with Debbie Smith, who is an expert in credentialing and certifications, and are also the president of SEDMA, an industry association for customer education professionals, to hear about how can you get involved in SEDMA, some of her tips and tricks of how do you certify someone in product credentialing or certifications in the best way. How do you build these programs, and sharing some of her lessons along the way. Then we also are going to be hearing from different practitioners. I'm putting together a customer education panel with different leaders. We're tackling the questions of how do you build customer education programs that actually help the business grow. So this is where it's going. We're also going to be looking at doing more independent kind of standalone episodes with panels or collaborating with industry organizations or thought leaders and doing more standalone episodes on particular topics. So this is where I want your input. How do you want the future of Harold's Curious Corner to be? What topics do you want me to cover? What areas do you think deserves more line shine on them? Let me know. Really curious to hear. And thanks as ever for staying curious and joining me in my Curious Corner. See you in season 3. So that's it for this conversation. I'm going to keep going down rabbit holes as we explore the weird and wonderful world of learning and development. If you want my full wrap up and takeaways, subscribe to my newsletter where I'll connect all the dots.